particular, I learned a huge amount from reading this book and felt like at every moment I was like, yes, yes, yes. And there were plenty of things that were not familiar to me personally, in terms of my own story, but everything felt familiar to me in terms of either what I've learned myself or what I've learned from all the families in the network. So I think this conversation will resonate with you. I hope so. Maria, thank you for being here. I know you've been really busy during Rare Disease Month sharing your story and talking about your book. I'm just going to jump in and give a few highlights about sort of where you are personally, because I think context is important, and then we can get into some particulars. So Maria is the mom of 3 children. Her oldest is, how old is Camille now?
Gonna be 21 next week.
21. And then your son PJ is
17.
And then Calliope Joy is 11. And when Calliope was 2, she was diagnosed with MLD, which is metochromatic leukodystrophy. And this is a fatal diagnosis. This is a life-limiting condition. The life expectancy, I think you were given when the diagnosis came, Maria, was what?
5 or 6.
5 or 6. And Calliope is a very stable, happily, a very stable 11 years old. She turned 11 in December. So this is a profound story, which is not about child loss. It's about living with a child who has a serious condition and all the things that come with it, some of which are particular and extraordinary from your story. It's also important to note that prior to Calliope's diagnosis, Maria's husband, Pat, was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, and he died last April 2020, so almost a year ago, in the time of COVID. So, and also shortly after Calliope's diagnosis, Pat's father had died from cancer and Maria's father died from cancer. So you had it coming from 3 generations, and a pile of doo-doo was poured on your head.
You can use the other word.
Pile of shit was poured on your head. And you have written a phenomenal book about it and I love this book for the authenticity and your sense of humor and the fact that you speak frankly, but in a way that I do not find harsh to read. I really, it's that perfect balance, in my opinion. The rest of you, I encourage you to read it and find out for yourself. So I'm going to jump right in. And this is a sort of, I'm doing this in a linear way.
Mm-hmm.
And part 1 is really focusing on diagnosis and then moving into the grief as a superpower part, because that could have been the subtitle to your book, Maria. And I remember when you and I were talking last May, you said grief as a superpower. I think maybe you were talking about that at one point as a potential title for the book. Mm-hmm. But before we get there, when you were given the diagnosis of MLD, you note about how they said, we have no treatment or cure, go home and take care of your child, keep your child comfortable. And we've all heard that, or different versions of that. And in the ideal world, when there is no treatment or cure, what would the "and" be? You are 9 years later, you have been living the "and." What would that "and" be? I'm sorry, there's no treatment and cure. And what would you say if you were a doctor delivering bad news?
And we're not going to let you do this by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to let you do this alone. You're not in this by yourself. That's all they need to say. Mm-hmm. And I know sometimes that's not true, but I a doctor who can say it and for whom it is true needs to. That's the thing I wish they had said. Yeah. I think that I have talked to medical students, and I think it's something that I continue to do I really hope the book, I really hope the book gets in the hands of neurology fellows, and other doctors who, I think they call it vital conversations. So
Vital
there's
talk. I think
vital talks, right? Vital talks. And I feel like I want to hand out copies of the book to young doctors and um, teach them the power of active listening, of absorbing emotion, of bearing witness, liberating themselves of the notion that there's something they can say to make you feel better, but simply walking into the fire with you, and not being seduced by the notion that doctors are indeed superhuman presences in families' life, and that they can defeat the unconquerable reality of suffering and loss. And I remember, I don't know if I mentioned the story in the book. I remember, I think you edited it out. I remember being at CHOP, a place that really had, absolutely like Boston Children's, like any of these prominent children's hospitals, that build its brand on miracles. I mean, I think there's even like a miracle network, which I just found, for parents like us, a cruel joke. But I remember hearing a young doctor say, well, I didn't go to medical school to watch children die. And I just wanted to, that was my angry phase. And I wanted to, engage in some physical response to that. It's like, well, why are you in medicine then? Get a different job, do something else. Because if you think that this is going to be an episode of Grey's Anatomy, where you get to be the superhuman doctor who saves the day all the time,
yeah,
you are in the wrong profession. And it still shocks me today that young doctors don't ponder seriously the limits. I mean, I remember there's a line from Adol Gawande that I'm sure you all know. He says, you want a doctor who is going to be Sherman and know how to negotiate a dignified surrender. You don't want a general who's going to, you want a doctor who's going to like manage to get as much territory as you can, but also know when to graciously surrender. You do not want Custer.
yeah. You don't want going down with.
You don't want Custer going down, taking everybody down with them.
Yeah. Well, so on that note, who were the medical providers who were most helpful to you? And this is my plug for what.
Well, of course, there was the pediatric advanced care team at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is one of the oldest in the country, and has been profiled by Jerome Groopman and NPR, and they are, visionaries and shining lights. And I remember having to explain to the other doctors what they didn't even know what PACT was. It was sort of like they operated underneath the radar. They had made the conscious decision not to use the H word in their name. Or to use the palliative care, palliative in their name, because it was bad branding, and people were so angry about those words. As we all know, and I've had families that I work with say to me, well, you're a hospice family, and hospice is giving up. And this is a family that, would spend the time in the ICU till the bitter end, until finally the intensivists said, enough is enough. You're not coming back here anymore. So as we all know, I think that those are families that, instead of, making impossible decisions in ICUs, could have had other options if they had worked with a group like PACT. And I understand that families may not get there right away. So I'm really passionate about that. Obviously, I'm a big believer in children's hospice. And actually, during the early period of Cal's diagnosis, one of the people I wrote to was the Duchess of Cambridge, Catherine, who is because in England there is Children's Hospice Week, and the Duchess is like, on television all the time talking about children's hospice, which I found amazing. So I wrote a letter, and she wrote this. Her secretary wrote a beautiful letter, and the Duchess sent her best to Calliope, and that if she came to America, maybe they would get to meet. I think that, so that team is absolutely critical. Of course, the amazing Amy Waldman, who is one of those doctors who I to this day, I have no idea how a 36-year-old woman could, just be so present and be so engaged and be so fearless and follow you down the crazy rabbit hole of grief, and see that it's beautiful and inspiring and not be terrified of it, which is what most people sensibly do. And then the third team is the amazing Anik Hogan, I'm not sure how many folks here got to work with complex care pediatric teams. They're a new team, and I think the complex care folks, who are basically, they spend all their times with medically complex children and are really focused on, I call them the Marie Kondo of pediatric medicine. They kind of declutter. So, for example, recently one of the orthopedist suggested Cal get a vector surgery. And, because he was a well-meaning, intense orthopedist, and he was like, oh, of course you should do the surgery. And Dr. Hogan said, well, Cal's not a great candidate. That's a procedure that's just going to make her x-ray better. It's not going to improve her quality of life. And so she talked her colleague down. I don't know how much money and time and heartache has been saved because Dr. Hogan Marie Kondoed a medical situation.
I love this image of Marie Kondo, the care situation, clutter.
Joy. She actually, the first time we met her, she spent 2 hours going through Cal's medical folder and just like decluttering it of all the extraneous information. Yeah. And
And also, before I want to move to the grief part, but this is sort of a good bridge to it. You talk at length about how Cal's nurses, when the hospice nurses, and this was, Cal's 11 now, so this is not end of life care at home. The nurses came into your life and that they said the right things.
Oh gosh, yeah. Pediatric hospice nurses should just run medical schools and do all this bedside training. And they shouldn't have doctors trained by doctors. They should have children's hospice nurses, because as we all know, pediatric hospice nurses are, if you didn't believe in, I'm not an angel person, but the closest thing to an angel is a children's hospice nurse. And I have always been amazed by the fact that they all tell you that this is work they are called to do, that they consider it an honor to do this. It is, and again, to quote the amazing Peter Clark, who is my colleague at St. Joseph's University, a Catholic priest, but he does bioethics teams and he works in NICUs. He said to me, if you have the courage to be around children like your daughter, our children, they will teach you the meaning of life and show you God's grace. And that was, to this day, a thing I tell newly diagnosed families. It is the truest thing anyone ever told me. And pediatric hospice nurses know that.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that doctors don't know that.
Well, I think the doctors that choose to stick closely to our families and these children do, I think. And I'm assuming that anyone who's chosen to join us today knows this, like these children teach us the meaning of life. And so is that part of what motivated you to write this book? I mean, to talk about your motivation and because what this book feels like to me is making sense of a journey that started off really messy, like the anticipatory grief phase. And I would love for you to define your definition of that, and then how that showed up briefly, how that showed up in your life, and then the evolution, because it is such an organic evolution.
When they told us Cal was going to die, I thought the book would be, so after Cal was diagnosed, as I described in the book, had a series of nervous breakdowns. And I threw away all my clothes. I threw away all my makeup. I sold my jewelry to pay for buying this portrait painting. My husband stood there, said absolutely nothing. I was like, going through, I just brought all my clothes to
Goodwill, I think you said.
Goodwill, yeah. They call it Green Drop here. I brought it to Green Drop, and I said, well, I'm never going to need these clothes again. And then about 6 months into it, I started to write this, what is called the Crazy Ass blog. That was actually its name. I wrote it to about 6 people, And the first thing I wrote was the list of the top 10 things you know that you're really screwed. And I thought it was really funny. There's some debate about whether it was funny. My editor thought it was funny. My late husband did not think it was funny. The social worker in neurology didn't think it was very funny, but I mean, I thought it was funny. So I shared it with my friends, and they're like, well, this is interesting. And so the Crazy Ass blog became this attempt, as you say, Blythe, to make sense of the insanity of it all, the nervous breakdowns. And then people started reading the blog. I don't know how many, but I think it was like hundreds and then thousands of people. And then I don't know who these people were. They would sometimes come up to me and write to me, but so I thought, okay, maybe there's something there. And it so happened I had written other books and I had a literary agent. So that was different. You know, I wasn't coming, this was not my first book. I'd never written about myself, but my agent and my editor at Beacon said, well, we think there's a there. We're not sure what it is, but we think there's a there. And at the time in 2014, when I signed the contract, I assumed the book would be about Cal's death. And needless to say, that wasn't what the book was about. And it took me 7 years, nearly 6 years to write the book, because I couldn't figure out how it ended. And I knew by 2014, as the gene therapy clinical trials came about, as the Leukodystrophy Center at CHOP was launched, I said, well, that's part of the story. I also have, I did actually meet Joe Biden in 2018. I was on this quest to meet Joe Biden because I was convinced that I was destined to meet him. He was going to tell me how to handle losing my husband and my daughter. And my editor at the time, because Joe Biden was tanking in the polls, was like, don't put that Joe Biden story. So the Joe Biden story isn't in the book. But I wasn't sure how it was going to end. So I ended up ending it with the moment I realized what a miracle was. And it was, having my wish for Cal answered. And so it's funny, as a writer, I saw one bad review of the book, on Amazon. Like, I like the reviewer said, I really like the first part of the book. I didn't like the ending. I didn't like the gene therapy stuff. And I only had 60,000 words. I mean, I could have written, I'm like President Obama. I could have written 600 word memoir. I'm jealous. And I'm also a little angry that his editor let him write a 600 word memoir. Most of us don't get to. So I don't know.
So you're gonna read, the last thing you're gonna do before we open up for questions, I mean, in a few minutes, will be to read the last part of the book. But I think I want to flag what you said, because what you just said was you're gonna end that you got your miracle for Cal. And let's be clear, your miracle is not that Cal is all better. And I just think it's really important to name that, because that's a big part of your evolution, right? Because what you wanted at the beginning is it changed over time because it had to, and you lived into it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was strange after, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here, people, you all could have written this book. When I was having my nervous breakdown, and in between the initial diagnosis with the not very nice neurologist and then meeting Amy Waldman 7 days later or 10 days later, I didn't talk. Which is amazing. Like, I talk all the time, and I just stopped talking. My husband and I stopped talking. And I think I was listening constantly to people who were telling me things, and I was absorbing all this stuff, and I hadn't wanted to go back to CHOP. I thought it was pointless to go back. And, my friend made me go. My husband was going to make me go. He was going to go, but he was not going to make me go. And I go there, and I wouldn't shut up when I arrived there. And in that meeting, I'm not sure where the idea came from, where I want to live long enough, Dr. Waldman, to see a child like my daughter saved from this. I have no idea. People don't believe that I said that. You can ask Amy Waldman, I said that. And then a year later, the gene therapy trial for MLD is published in Science on the 1 year and 8-day anniversary of Cal's diagnosis. And I am reeling that this has happened. And Dr. Waldman says, this is what you're supposed to do. And I resisted it. And I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't help other people's children. And then a year later, we would meet the first child who needed to get to Milan from the United States. And she was a little girl who looked just like Cal. I mean, she really did.
Yeah.
I mean, she looked just like Cal. And then it was done. Then my life changed and I was back. I was back. It was 2 years later. And on August of 2014, when I found out that there was a little girl that we could get to Milan, and that the medical team was really confident, really believed in this treatment, and today Cecilia is fabulous. Last time I saw Cecilia in person was 2019. And she was at that point 5, the age her sister was when she died. And Cecilia was holding her mother's hand, no braces, no wheelchair, nothing, and no feeding tube. And she was wearing a sequin dress. And I said, Cecilia, how come you're so beautiful? And she said, it's the sequins, Miss Maria. And
yeah.
As we all know, right? Kids with these disorders are not supposed to be at 5 wearing sequin dresses
and talking.
And Cal and Cece had actually met Cal. And when Cece met Cal, Cece said, Cal is my best friend. And we were all, her parents were there and my children were there. And we were just like gobsmacked. How did this 5-year-old know this? And my son, who, was just staring at Ceci and kept saying, she's the same disease as Cal. She's the same disease as Cal. And he was like, for that afternoon, it was like this parallel universe where he was playing basketball and talking to his sister the way he was supposed to. It was just,
So that gives me goosebumps. It's my disease, my daughter's disease didn't have a cure during her treatment during her life.
And not curative therapy. Yeah.
We're hoping for one. Clinical trials open this year, but I want to just flag that, what you're talking about for people who haven't read the book yet is that the foundation that you started in Calliope's name has been using the funds to fund families to receive the therapy that your daughter is too old to receive. And that is, that's what Calliope has enabled. That's what you have enabled. That is the miracle. That is part of the miracle. Okay, I want to go back for a moment. Can you go? A lot of what we hear about with Courageous Parents Network and is this notion of parents wanting to be this driving goal that all parents have, and generally, and particularly when your child is ill and the stakes feel very high, to be the best parent they can possibly be to their child. And I want to go in the early days. And I want to talk to you about how your definition of what that means has evolved over time. But can you read at the bottom of page 84, where you say, these are in the early days, Cal's prognosis had convinced me that I would fail her as her mother, and just read it to the end of that paragraph, because I think we can all recognize this.
Yeah, this is anticipatory grief, right? In full form. Cal's prognosis had convinced me I would fail her as a mother if I did anything except hold her and be with her. It seemed to me an abdication of my maternal duties if I left her with other people. We had to make memories, and it was a sin not to spend every waking moment with her. It did not matter if my marriage or my other children or my job or my own health suffered. All that mattered was my Cal. Not surprisingly, this had rather significant implications for how my other children were mothered during this time. I was MIA. The more generous interpretation was that I was having a nervous breakdown and needed to keep them at a safe distance to protect them from the fallout. but that it would have caused irrevocable harm if I had exposed them to an unfiltered version of my grief. The whole family was drowning, but until I could save myself, I could help others. I prayed they could get along well enough without me for a while. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just.
Do you want me to read the final paragraph, or do you want me to stop there?
We'll stop there for now. Like, so how has your definition, or how have your goals as Cal's mom evolved over time?
I leave the house now. I put her down, and it was really hard. I remember my husband and I finally fought our way through something to get to the point of we would go to Quizzo every Thursday, and that was like sacred time. We would go and do this stupid pub quiz with our friends and have really bad beer, and and it took us so long to get there. And I wear makeup again, but it took a really long time. I have apologized, and I continue to apologize to my older children, and I say to them all the time, I'm sorry, you didn't deserve this. You didn't deserve this. And they say, oh, Mom, you were okay. My daughter Camille, once she was upset with me, she could have called me on it, and I totally said, yeah, I was terrible. I was a mess. And I think that acknowledging it, speaking the truth about it, not trying to pretend you were anything but what you were, and I think making amends and saying, you didn't deserve any of this. I'm really sorry that I let you down. But it is like the old metaphor of when you're on an airplane, you have to put the oxygen mask on first, because if you are suffocating, you're not going to be able to help anyone. And so that, as we all know, right, that's the hardest part, that you're drowning parallel to all these people you love, and there's nothing you can do to help them because you're drowning. And then finally, when you can kind of get strong enough and come up for air, then you can pull people out. But while you're drowning and you're all going through it together,
well,
you just go under.
Part of what I was struck by reading your evolution, your sort of the coming out of the darkest part was, I mean, that first of all, you allowed yourself to be in the dark part for a while because really you had no choice. Like you felt this was devastating. You were devastated. You couldn't talk yourself out of it. You had to evolve through it. And what you describe is the liberation, like part of what got you to the grief as a superpower, I read, is that this liberation that happens, and you talk about how liberated about when and how to tell the truth about how you were feeling and doing. And I'm going to read something, one of the many things I underlined. Right after Cal got sick, I just love the honesty of this, and I think everyone can relate to this. Right after Cal got sick, I lacked the discipline to tell a more socially palatable version of the truth. The rage and grief needed to go someplace, and I lived by a standard of unfiltered truth. And you write about how some days you could perform and deliver the measured, responsible response and lie about how you were doing. And then on other days, when you felt compelled to tell the truth, quote, it was thrilling and liberating to be unmoored from the social conventions that had trapped me in my previous life.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you know this feeling. All those rules that apply to normal people. I wrote about feeling like you live among the humans but are no longer one of them, and living here in the main line, which is very posh, and everyone's like a size 00, wearing Lululemon, and they have perfect houses and perfect lives, and I was like this weaponized individual that would just walk into situations and call everybody on their shit. Like, you're all a bunch of hypocrites, and I was the mad woman speaking truth to power, and it was liberating. I was telling Blyth this story about how I had done an interview for CNN. I don't even know how these people found me, and it was about Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, and it was, if you remember the book is arguing that women and mothers need to lean into their careers and not pull back because they have the obligations at home. And I was at that point the mother of a sick kid, the wife of a sick husband. And so this reporter from CNN asked me, so like, what do you think of this book and this argument that women should lean in? I'm like, Sheryl Sandberg has had nothing bad happen to her. That's why she can talk like this is crap. And of course, the piece kind of went viral, and they toned down what I was saying, but I don't think I would have ever said such a thing to CNN had I not been in that, unfettered from social convention. And I was,
well,
but it is powerful. It's powerful if you can direct it, right? And
that's, you can direct it, because that's what you say. You said, when you run out of things to be afraid of, you find that nothing can stop you. I was not brave so much as unfettered by anxieties and fears. And in these flashes of clarity or madness, it seemed to me that grief had made me extraordinary, that Cal was making all of us extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, I'm telling you guys something you already know, that when the worst thing happens, like, what are you worried about?
Yeah.
And so the worst thing has literally happened, and it's this nightmare, and people tell you, oh, there's nothing worse than losing a child. And once it happens and you become part of this, like, you're living among the humans feeling, you have this capacity to just do things because you're not, once you don't have to worry about failing or embarrassing yourself. Once you don't have to worry about embarrassing yourself, right? Once you don't have to worry about sounding stupid, or foolish or naive because you've been in the ICU for a month and a half and you had to tell the medical team to intubate your kid or whatever it is you've been through. And you're hearing people complain about the fact that their kids don't do their homework. And you're just sort of like, is that a problem that you actually have? So when things occurred to me, like writing to Joe Biden, that I'm going to meet Joe Biden, which is insane, right? But I got to meet Joe Biden. And when I decided that, I was going to raise money and sell cupcakes, people just sort of, people tried to talk me out of it. People, thought this is maybe not the best thing. Maria gaining 50 pounds, maybe being around cupcakes is not a great idea. I didn't care. And so what if I fail? I have to do something. And again, this feeling of all this pain and emotion, if you can not suppress it and not pretend it's not there, but in fact channel it to something that's meaningful for you and your family and your child, whether it's bringing pajamas to the babies in the ICU, or whether it's bringing food to the hospice unit, or asking your palliative care team what they need. Like, can we bring lunch for the conference you're hosting? Can we, and all of that stuff that you can do, which is it doesn't require selling 50,000 cupcakes or raising $1 million or getting a Chance Zuckerberg Initiative grant. It's really great when people do that and they can raise $1 million, and God bless. And people like me selling 50,000 cupcakes, I don't know what would possess me. But, in the end, we didn't launch the gene therapy trial. All we did was give people money to get to Milan. That's all we did. We just wrote a check for $2,000 for every family. And we got to invest in people's miracles. We got to, and I remember a friend of mine who had lost her 20-year-old daughter to cancer. And she was following the foundation and was reading the blog. And she wrote to me one day and she said, "You found the secret." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The only way you save yourself is helping other people." that's how you get through it. But she said you can't tell people that. They have to come to it on their own. So maybe I'm jumping the gun by telling people that here, but you'll find your truth. And it's whether it's, you know, you run for Congress, or whether it's you go to Rare Disease Day and you speak to your state legislators, or you know, work with the NTSAD and volunteer.
You find your way. There's a having faith in it, and just having faith. And I think you and I have felt, and I think Jennifer would agree, and others who are on the phone, I mean, who are on this Zoom, it's like, in our way, we believe our children have lead us. That they lead us, even though they're not, that their agency works in, as you said, miraculous ways. I'm going to read a section that that resonated a great deal for me. Sometimes I wondered if I was supposed to have Cal in my life to learn in a different way of looking at the world, to see the perfection of her divine love, gifts that do not require words and which must be condensed into such a short life. My wonderfully wise and kind friend Scott Charles offered a different explanation. He wondered if it occurred to Pat and me that Cal was lucky to have us as parents. The fact that she is so joyful despite this terrible disease was in no small part because Pat and I were her parents, and we should not underestimate how much our love saved her. I have to admit that made me feel better. So maybe if Cal had to have a life like this, her blessing would be to have Pat and Camille and PJ and me take care of her and be there for this. Cal surely does not see her life as a tragedy. She accepts what is and smiles and laughs every day. And then later you write, just as in the same vein, my Cal cannot mourn the life her father and I dreamed for her because she has no sense of what this might be. Her world is our family, and she has found a way to mine her life and this tiny world for every bit of joy and happiness that is possible for her. Maria, I read that and I was like, that is a gift you have just given to every family who is in this now, because that's all we're doing, is trying to give our children the best lives they can possibly be. And they don't know what they need is the love. Like, and that's like, check that box. And if that's the only box you check, you're good.
You're good. You're good. You've done your job.
And it's important.
Everything else is noise.
And then you do check a few others, though. Can you do you remind it, is that what you say to families when they ask you for advice, newly diagnosed families? What is it that what's the advice?
I always tell them that it's so weird that I spend so much time with newly diagnosed families. I tell people that being newly diagnosed is as bad as losing a child, and maybe in some ways worse, because by the time we lose our children, we have sort of steeled ourselves for that, for the most part, unless it's a sudden, incident. But for a lot of us with living with these diseases and the families you work with, that's not the case. And I say to them, well, no one could have been more crazy, more cowardly, and more demented than I was. And I'm sitting here having a lucid conversation with you. So if I can do it, you're going to be fine. I put myself as really, I was not, it's really funny to me, Blythe, I mean, like, I would never have named an organization the Courageous Parents Network unless I was sort of winking to myself, because I've never felt courageous. I mean, and Blythe is, someone who also has taken her, talk about the superpower of grief, to harness it, to raise awareness, to bring a community together, to heal people, and not make us pariahs, which is what society has tried, because they're so uncomfortable with people like us, that we don't want to bother you, right? We don't want to upset you, as if, we're going to be upset by something anyone says. But I think that, the idea of acknowledging that the pain it must be endured. And then there's this other place at the end. And I do come to, I believe it is a metamorphosis. It is the old version of yourself dying. And that's why it feels like you're dying. I also tell families all the time, it only feels like you're dying. Because the old person is being burnt away and this new version of yourself is coming. And then you're going to one day, you'll want to wear underwear and makeup again. And, it will you'll be like a light flickering on, and it will last longer. And you're never the way you were. But I mean, I like Blyth, I know everyone understands this. I am so trapped by the paradox that I hate this disease. I hate what it's done to my family. I wish I'd never heard of it. And yet but Cal is perfect. And she has made me, I don't want to be that other person again. And yet I am trapped by what has made me this person. I look at people and I just like the way we all live. Like a good day for us is we're not in the hospital. We're not in the ICU. A good day for us is that our children were comfortable and they smiled and they laughed. And how many of our friends who have healthy children don't even notice the miracle of their healthy children? And sadly, the only way you can notice the miracle of your healthy children is suffer. And so, I'm not a religious person in a conventional sense, but I am trapped by the notion that, if you believe in some divine God, then God's love is only possible because of suffering. So nothing good is possible without suffering. And so our suffering, although horrific and cruel, is also what makes us human and makes us see the possibility of love and truth and joy in a way that is so decluttered and pure. And like our children, kids like Cameron and Cal, they're just love. All they do is give love and receive love. And how could you not see the perfection of that? And yet it's this horrible, nightmarish disease. I mean, I like everyone here wince when people say, oh, God chose you to have this, or you were chosen.
So, okay. We're gonna open it up to questions, but I think this is a good moment for you to read the last few sentences before the epilogue.
Okay.
So which begin with Cal has taught me, and then we'll open it up to questions. It's page 175.
Okay, there it is. Yeah. Ooh, okay.
Cal has taught me.
Cal has taught me. Okay. Cal has taught me that when the worst possible thing happens, you have nothing left to fear. She has taught me that fearless people are maddening and relentless. And if we are fortunate, we can turn being maddening and relentless into a strength. She has taught me that when you have tamed your fear and you harness its power to do extraordinary things, she has taught me that when you have tamed your fear, you can harness its power to do extraordinary things. In the end, the only way to save yourself from the grief is to find a way to help others.
Yeah, I know that's a repeat of what you've said, but I just feel like it's just the punctuation to this conversation. What we haven't had, because I really do want people to have a chance to ask you questions, and to maybe do that in the chat, or because I'm not sure, Jennifer, if we can see people enough. There are so many people here. It might be best to do it in the chat. I'm just going to blab while people write their questions if they have them. Maria and her husband Pat started the Calliope Joy Foundation and the Cupcake Challenge, with PJ sort of originating the challenge as a way of selling a ton of cupcakes, but really raising money, which ultimately has been used to make it possible for people to receive this life-changing gene therapy that Maria was referencing. Um, and it really is a success story, Maria. And I really appreciate that you noted that for many families, like, this is an extraordinary story, and you are not suggesting that the only way to make a difference is to raise a ton of money and help make gene therapy a reality for people. They're like that. Those are the exceptional stories that aren't because the people are exceptional, but as you said, like, the things just come together in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm trying to see if there's any questions here.
I know.
I think there are more comments than
Your
questions.
comment. You're like,
Um,
oh,
but
Amy.
uh, Marie Kondo, people like the, so Amy has mentioned them. I think it's okay for people to raise their hand. I think,
Okay.
would that be all
Let
right?
me see. Let me see. I'll view. I'll get into gallery view and then I'll see. All
Yeah.
right. Does anybody, let's see. Does people, hi, Laura. Laura, do you have a question? Unmute.
Hi,
Okay.
Laura.
Hi. So I'm wondering, a lot of this you're talking about like meaning making, giving, kind of paying it forward, giving back. We've also been on a call, actually, I think it was just last week where, Jennifer, perhaps you mentioned like kind of hyper focusing on meaning making and like, okay, I'm like joining the committee and not paying attention to your own grief and kind of internal battle. So I'm curious, Maria, for you, what that balance was like, because it sounds like you've been really busy and productive in a great way, but also kind of grappled with the tough stuff.
Oh, that's a great question, Laura. I think that you have to pace yourself. I mean, I think that there was a period where I was just like sprinting through this, and it was great to, do events rather than deal with how I was feeling about things. And it's taken a long, and I think that, mentors like Blyth and this organization are really great because people like me can sort of say, I always have people, and I don't follow my advice, but I can say you need to slow down. You do not need to raise $1 million today. You do not need to sell $50,000 cupcakes or something. I feel like, it's important to um, use this meaning making activity, which is, actually a concept from sociology and anthropology by the anthropologist Clifford Geertz, the idea of, the thing that, as an anthropologist, the thing that gives our life, that guides and orients us, is the web of meaning by which we, choose a path. And so when you're grieving, absolutely meaning making is so crucial. And so I think there's days where, you want to, you can just sort of jump into some activity, but then there's other days when you spend all day crying. And that's totally, I think you got to give both things space. And if it's okay that you use meaning making to put off maybe dealing with your grief until you're ready, I think that's fine. I have many friends who've done that, who just like, immerse themselves in work to grieve or to delay some of the more ugly parts of grieving, because that, I mean, I do wonder, with my husband's death, which is not the same thing as your child, but I mean, I feel like I was preparing. I feel like I've done a lot of the grief work already. And so I think I've had a healthier mourning period with Pat, because I was like this Olympic athlete training for this, and that these activities really help. But I think it is about balance, Laura, and people like Blyth and me can help folks who are just looking for a way to make sure, are you taking care of yourself? And
Yeah, I would add that the meaning making, it's you can't like suddenly see meaning that you're making. It like oozes, it like appears out of the fog slowly over time, and often upon reflection and time. Like, you can't make it happen. It happens organically. So just trust the process, do the things to take care of yourself. And this is even if you don't have even if the diagnosis suggests that you don't have years and years with your child, it doesn't just, it is still a marathon, not a sprint. And these things emerge over time. Um,
Yeah.
and you'll see it when it hits you in the face. Like it will hit, if something needs to be seen, it'll hit you in the face.
Mm.
Um, so Mate is, forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, is wondering if you worry about what would happen if, what would happen. I think this is what you mean. What would happen to Calliope if something happened to you?
Oh, well, I mean, unfortunately now, I mean, I'm sort of, well, my oldest daughter is 21, and I was sort of thinking that if something happened to me, that I would have to put Cal in a facility. I would have to put, I would have to have someone take care of Cal in a facility. And my daughter said, no, Mom, she's now 21, and, she would oversee this team. I said, well, you'd have to live in this house and you'd have to oversee the nurses. And she said, I want to do that. So I think that my dad been given this gift of getting my kids to the point of where they're old enough, and that one has chosen that. I mean, I didn't want to ask anyone to do that.
No.
I didn't want to ask anyone to do that. And I never thought I'd even be in this conversation of having a 5-year plan. I even actually tried to think about having a 10-year plan. But that, well, I mean, Cal's now in the top 3% of 3% of outcomes, 3rd percentile of outcomes for kids with MLD. We are now in uncharted territory.
Mm-hmm.
And like we joke, like clearly Cal has not read any of the medical journal articles about her disease. And so, like, and I'm sure a lot of you got to this point. So many of you might have got to this point where, especially with a rare disease, the medical team was like, well, we've got nothing. I don't know. So, I mean, we go to the checkups, and like, it's a weird place to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not complaining. Yeah.
Jennifer?
So, Maria, I'm a bereaved mom too. So, I mean, not too, but I'm a bereaved mom. So that puts my question in perspective. But what I wanted to ask you, in writing this book and naming it, and I actually had this conversation around a fire pit just Monday night. Do you get grief over using the word harnessing grief, that phrase, and then we positioned it as a superpower because people are afraid of grief. And then when you say to them that you can harness it, that you can actually rise it up. And I think I did that when my son was first diagnosed. And that's why we went on to do the things that we did in our family, raising money. I was capable of seeing that. And I said to somebody, well, it's really resiliency. Like harnessing grief is really, in some ways, resiliency. But I'm curious how you came to that word, or to that decision as a title. And what do you mean by it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is grit. I mean, I live in Philadelphia, so Angela Duckworth and Adam Grant. This is like grit country here at the University of Pennsylvania. And I guess it is resilience, I suppose. But for me, Jennifer, it was like grief was this thing. It was my companion. It was everything. And I compared it to like learning my dad and my husband and my father-in-law had cancer. I mean, we learned all of that. I learned all of that, and that was bad, right? That was bad. But when I learned that Cal was sick, that was off the charts, crazy different. I mean, like, I describe this in the book. I wanted to drive my car into the Schuylkill River. I remember leaving CHOP and thinking, if I drive really fast, I can drive into the Schuylkill River. And I mean, I had been sitting in oncology suites and in infusion suites with my husband and my dad. And suddenly I'm like, now I'm going to go over. So to me, after Cal got sick, it was this descent into grief. And it was trying to drown me. And I remember making a choice. I'm not going to I remember thinking to myself, I can be that lady at the Starbucks wearing the sweater on the 100-degree day and just, go Miss Havisham on this. I could just like live in my dreams of the life I was supposed to have. I can just, and no one would blame me. I mean, no one would have said, oh, Maria Kefalas, she did that. I just remember saying, okay, no, I'm going to take all of this pain, all of this insanity, all of this energy, and all of this force, and I'm going to channel it into some project or some endeavor, because it has to be something. There has to be some purpose in this. And we're not going through this for nothing. And I didn't know what it was, Jennifer. I mean, maybe I think I know now. But I felt like there has to be something. And I mean, I also happen to know Liz Scott, so Liz Scott, who founded Alex's Lemonade, is my neighbor. I mean, she literally lives down the street from me. And, Liz said to me, so not many families going through this get to meet one of the most famous grieving mothers in the world, whose daughter was featured on Oprah and Time magazine as one of the most inspiring children ever to live, with Anne Frank, and who now runs a foundation that has raised, I think, $400 million for pediatric cancer. And so, Liz said to me very early on, with great humility, normal people don't get to change the world. And here is a woman who could back it up on the most extraordinary level. I mean, her foundation, through selling lemonade, had pioneered CAR T-cell treatments, and I thought a lot about Liz and Alex. I didn't know Alex. I mean, I lived in Pennsylvania and knew the story and had seen her, but it seems to me that Alex knew, because her whole life had been cancer, right? She had been diagnosed at age 1. She'd always been in great proximity to death, right? So cancer and illness was the only thing she ever knew. And I think that as she realized she was dying, it was almost like she chose this path to give her parents something to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was remarkable. Like, she had this incredible self-awareness of her own mortality. And she, at the end of her life, said, we're not raising money to help me. We're going to help other children. And to this day, like, how she started from the age of, I think, about 4 or 5, she would come home from the hospital and say, I want to sell lemonade to help the children at the hospital. Yeah. She and her brother would do this, and she did it until her death. And the family has now, I mean, her brother, who helped found the foundation, graduated from Harvard recently, left a job in consulting, and now runs the foundation with his I mean, so it's like this thing has been passed down from one generation to the other. It's like a calling. It is the most remarkable thing. But I do think it's different than grit. I do.
I think it's different than grit too. I don't know. We need to come up with a new word for it. Everybody, we're taking your feedback, your input. If you come up with a better word than grit, I certainly do think it's courage, but as some of you know, I didn't call Courageous Parents Network because I thought parents thought they were courageous. I called it because parents don't realize that they're being courageous. And on the other side of it, I wanted to remind them that there is a lot of courage happening, even when you don't realize that's what it is. And it's because our children make us do shit we never thought we could do. And we are capable of it. We are going to put the poll back up, just because if you came in late, and let us know who you are. I'm aware of the time. I can stay on for a little longer. I don't know about Maria. If people want to stay and ask some more questions, please do. We'll get off by 4:10. So if you do want to stay and speak openly with Maria, please do. You can just start chatting. You don't have to put the raise your hand. You could just blurb and we'll hear.
I want to shout out to Betsy Holly. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Betsy.
She's being very discreet.
Yeah, she's with the Pediatric Palliative Care Network for Pennsylvania.
Yay! Shout out to Betsy for her amazing work.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so here's the book. We did include a link to it, and I really recommend it so much.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is like, and all the book royalties, author royalties go to charity. So, and in fact, I'm hoping to use some of the money for pediatric hospice initiatives and PACT at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and Boston Children's, which are programs that are near and dear to my heart. But this has been, I mean, I've done a ton of these things, but this is like really special. I shouldn't say that because someone's gonna say, I was at your other event. You said that was special too, but no, this is very special. And Blyth blurbing the book. And when Blyth, I was so nervous to have Blyth read the book. And when she and Jennifer called and said, we like it, I was just, phew. Even though I say I'm not I don't worry about things, and I don't generally worry about stuff. I was like, if Blyth is like, well, this is some stuff that, you know.
No, I really love this book. Maria, one question. Somebody did ask about friends. Like, how did you navigate the friends thing?
The friends thing. Well, we all know that. I mean, right? Like boy, this declutters your life real fast. So and it's always amazing to me the people who stick around and the people who don't. You never can predict it. And so the first round after Cal was diagnosed, we certainly were whittled down to a core group of people. And then after Pat died, I have to say, I got whittled down again, but I am very fortunate to have clearly some people in my life that, are not going to give up. But it's really, people just project all this stuff onto us, right? That they don't want to upset us by being around, having their healthy child around us, and they don't seem to understand that no one would wish this on anybody. We're not sitting there like resenting their healthy children. And I'm so glad that there's groups like this that exist. I mean, so many of us grew up in a world where parents like us we were just erased, and our children were erased, and no one talked about it. And so it's so empowering to have our stories be out there and have a place for us to. I mean, social media is horrible for a lot of things, but I think giving voice to communities like ours, so transformational and healing and sustaining.
I mean, I want to thank you for writing this book, for having it, because it does raise, because of how it's written and what it's talking about, it raises the visibility of experiences like families like ours and what grief can do. And I want to, Beecher Grogan's also here, Lucy's Love Bus. She's someone Lucy's Love Bus does a lot for families affected with serious illness in New England, particularly kids affected by cancer. So just noting that Beecher is here. No, and I do part of me is kind of sad that this book has come out in the time of COVID, because there's been so much chatter and noise about grief, and COVID is like a devastating thing, and 500,000 people have died from COVID, and it's not okay. But this has been happening people grieving illness, devastating diagnoses. This has been happening before. And there's a part of me that worries that people are getting a little saturated on this topic of grief, because it's the topic of the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, when people say that, we're all grieving now, and we all miss school and summer camp, but the intense sort of grief that we've experienced is not the same as.
It's different.
It's different. I mean, and if you've lost someone, of course that is the same thing. But this whole idea of we're grieving our old lives, and I mean, it's amazing to me that people feel like they got a taste of it, and it's really traumatizing. And you're sort of like, well, wait until you have, wait until you have right? People are nodding. I don't need to explain it.
Yeah.
I love this audience. I love this group. Yeah.
Barb is saying, yep.
Yep. Yeah.
This is our life.
Yeah. I mean, those of us who haven't left our house. I mean, now the whole world lives like we do, right? Mm-hmm. So now everyone never leaves their house. Now everyone's terrified if they get a fever or if someone's coughing. Now they're speed dialing their doctor every time someone has what looks like the flu. Now everyone's wearing masks and washing their hands all the time. Yeah. So for me, as I'm sure a lot of you, the world didn't change that much. Now everyone lives like us.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, man up, man, because
Yeah.
this is how a lot of us live all the time.
Yeah.
But
well, and so that is actually that part is good, like the raising the just opening people's eyes. All right, I'm going to adjourn our time together. I want to thank everybody who chose to spend an hour with us, and more particularly an hour with Maria. Maria, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for writing this book in Cal's lifetime. I think it's really important to hear from families, especially when their children are living. So thank you for that. I hope things continue to be stable and well in Cal's life and in your life with your children, and everybody on the phone, on the Zoom.
thank you guys.
Thank you. And
You guys are amazing.
stay well. And
Stay well.
we'll send a follow-up email with a link to this recording if you want to watch again. So don't worry. And I do encourage you to read the book. Okay.
Thanks everyone. Be well.
Bye,
Be
everybody.
safe.
Thank
Bye
you.
everyone.